What's up, guys? I'm Chris Spags here, back with another 4 quarters video for today's 8-game NBA slate, courtesy of Awesemo.com. As always, the likes and comments and support mean a ton, so please like this video right now and leave a comment down below telling me which low-owned expected guy you think is going to be the best play on the slate, the guy who nobody's talking about. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. As I mentioned yesterday, we did have that little contest in the comments to guess Enes Kanter's fantasy point value. We do have a winner, and that winner's going to get a special shout out at the end of the video. The first corner I want to hit on today is a game with the Kings visiting the Pelicans. This one has a 237.5 point combined total, which is a slate high, and it represents a 6.7 boost for Sacramento and a 1.3 point boost for New Orleans. Now, the motivations here are questionable because the Kings are pretty much out of the playoff race. They might still technically be in it, but they're not in it. So we have some concerns there about the rotations, but Buddy Hield's minutes have been there. At 14% ownership in a perfect matchup, it seems like a good spot for him. He hasn't shown much of a penchant for revenge against his former team who traded him away for DeMarcus Cousins, but it's a nice spot. The pace, the spacing should fit him, so I like Buddy Hield here at that much ownership. De'Aaron Fox has had 16 shots in each of the last 2 games, and his assist upside is going to be here because, again, the pace is here. So really, as long as we're playing these guys straight, it seems like the Kings are going to play this one out with normal rotations here and at least a normal amount of effort. I think Fox is a good play, and playing him alongside Hield also works for me. Marvin Bagley saw decreased minutes last game with Nemanja Bjelica still in the rotation, and Bogdan Bogdanovic seemed like he siphoned some directly away from Bagley. That could certainly flip this game. Bagley's in a really good matchup with pace, and an interior for the Pelicans is not that good right now. So I don't mind Bagley here at 10% ownership. Might be worth at least matching that, maybe a little bit more. Bogdan Bogdanovic has had over 29 minutes and over 28.75 fantasy points in his last 2 games. And as I mentioned, it did seem like he took some minutes away from Bagley last game. He's there, he's in the mix, but I don't know if he has enough of a ceiling to really be worth the play. His price is decent, but on a slate like this, I feel like you might need more points. And if he gets you 30 fantasy points at his price, I don't know that it's doing enough for you to win a tournament, so I don't mind him, but I might be more inclined to go back to Bagley in the higher upside in the hopes that he takes some minutes back. Harrison Barnes has been very boomer bust lately by his standards, especially compared to his Dallas stint, but this kind of pace, this matchup, where he could get some scoring going, could get some rebounding going, it seems like a spot that's good for him, so I don't mind Harrison Barnes at under 5% ownership. Elfrid Payton lost some minutes down the stretch in the second half, and the question to me is if he couldn't get there versus Atlanta in a game without Anthony Davis, is he going to get there in any game at this point? I don't know that they're inclined to give him a ton of run. Without Frank Jackson, that makes it a little more appealing to go to Elfrid Payton, but I think you could just see Ian Clark take some more off the table, probably not do a lot with it, so I'm not dying to get Elfrid Payton, but I think if you want to have some exposure, it does make sense because of the no Frank Jackson thing. Julius Randle is better than Elf versus Atlanta, but the question is also for him, is he worth it at his price? He got 42 fantasy points in that game. He's not showing a ton of upside. Maybe he can get there more, but I think they're more inclined to see what they have with the young guys, especially a guy I'm going to talk about in a second, so I'm not dying to get to Julius Randle either. I mentioned Ian Clark, who saw the majority of the lead guard run for Elfrid Payton that second half versus Atlanta. Still didn't do a lot with it. 24% ownership for him seems really high given the fact that he doesn't have much of a ceiling. He's an okay value guy, an okay punt. I'd probably prefer him on FanDuel where you just throw him away. So I'm not a big Ian Clark guy. If you want to get some exposure, sure, because I guess he could pick up some of what Frank Jackson leaves behind. And for Christian Wood, a guy who I love, has been great in preseason stuff, been great in the G League, been great every time he touches the court whenever he gets an opportunity. 53.25 fantasy points last game, a lot of blocks, a lot of scoring, getting to the line, doing a lot of great hustle things as well, looked really good. With AD back in the rotation, it's hard to see him getting the full minutes, but he could pull a little from AD, could pull a little from Randall. I think it's worth having some exposure to him tonight because we know that upside. He's a 1.3 fantasy per minute guy. So, I mean, he's getting there on a permanent basis. The question is whether he's going to get enough run, and I'm not confident enough in it to load up on him, but I am interested enough to want a little bit. The next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Nets visiting the Sixers. This one has a 231.5 point combined total, which represents a 4.2 point boost for Philly, and it's flat with Brooklyn's season average. Joel Embiid is projected for 23% ownership in this matchup, a spot where the Nets have gotten killed recently by guys like JaVale McGee. So Joel Embiid, a much more talented player, could have a lot more upside. I think it's a good spot for Embiid, especially coming off of that pretty embarrassing loss in Orlando, which Ben Simmons was sidelined for. I think these guys are going to come out with some sort of oomph, and I like Embiid in this matchup for all the reasons that anybody looks good in this Nets matchup. Ben Simmons projects for under 10% ownership, and his price is down a bit after missing last game due to illness. He's in a good spot here, and we saw what the Sixers did without him. They just completely crapped the bed, so getting Simmons back in there, I think a little more motivated, a little bit cheaper, and a spot in which I think the Nets can stay competitive. I like Simmons quite a bit. Jimmy Butler's been over 44 fantasy points in 4 out of his last 6 games, and he would have gotten there versus Orlando too if they just didn't get blown out. The starters got pulled pretty early in the 4th quarter, so Butler to me looks good. I think he's an interesting play. Obviously, he's going to take a little bit away from some of the other guys, so you might not want to play him alongside Simmons and Embiid, but I think some mixes of these guys are pretty appealing in a spot versus the Nets that should be close. Tobias Harris and JJ Redick are a bit less appealing to me, though Tobias Harris at under 10% ownership is an interesting counter and a pivot to me. I'm going to play a lot of Embiid, a lot of Butler, and a lot of Simmons. So Harris, I don't mind quite as much. JJ Redick, I think, is going to suffer from the Nets defense. They're allowing just 33.9% from the floor on the year from deep, so that's where JJ Redick makes his money. He can still get there too, but I'd rather go to these other guys who are a little more confident in. D'Angelo Russell's had over 58.25 fantasy points in 3 out of his last 4 games, and his one down game was a 49.5 fantasy point day versus the Lakers. He's had a 32% usage rate in 34 minutes in his last 4 games as well, so that entire stretch he's been doing it night after night, getting the looks, getting the run, not getting the hook from Kenny Atkinson. So this is a spot where I think he can get back on track. He certainly is due for one of those dud games that he can throw at us at any time, but at not a lot of ownership, I like going to him here in what, again, should be a competitive game. Spencer Dinwiddie hasn't hit value recently, but it's mostly because he's just shooting terribly. He's still getting 16-ish shots a game, and the minutes have been there, so I don't mind Dinwiddie here, but the fact that he's going to be 18% owned compared to D'Angelo Russell, currently projected for 6%, that doesn't seem right to me. Much rather have Russell, but I certainly don't mind Dinwiddie, and the opportunity's been there for him. Joe Harris looks like an okay play to me, but Philly's also limiting threes about as well as the Nets are, giving up the same field goal percentage from deep, so I don't mind Joe Harris here. I think he can still get going. Shot 13 and 15 times in his last 2 games. They're getting him a little more involved as they try to get into the playoffs, so Joe Harris is okay, but a guy who you probably don't want a ton of. And Jared Allen projects well for me. I think the ceiling's questionable there, and also really a risk of foul trouble with how Joel Embiid gets to the line. So that could be a spot where you see some run for Ed Davis, but I don't mind Jared Allen. He's just never a guy I land on a ton because he doesn't offer enough for me to really want to force him into lineups. The next corner I want to hit on is a game with the Magic visiting the Pistons. This one is a 207.5 point combined total, which represents a 2.3 point drop for Detroit and a 4.1 point drop for Orlando. Now, this is an ugly Vegas game, but it does have serious playoff implications with both these guys fighting for their playoff spots. They are the 7th and 8th seeds currently in the Eastern Conference. The Pistons, the 7th seed, Magic, the 8th seed. So these guys have something to play for. As we just saw with the Magic and the Heat the other day, when these teams have something to play for in the East, they are going to bring all the heat to it. No pun intended. So this should be a spot where you're going to see these guys compete as hard as they can, despite the low Vegas total. Andre Drummond had 47.75 fantasy points, despite some foul trouble in 29 minutes versus Denver. The spot looks good to me. I think the fact, too, that these are 2 good defenses should allow him some more rebounding opportunities. So I don't mind Andre Drummond here, and I think playing him with Blake Griffin, an interesting approach in this game, which should be competitive. Blake Griffin had 29 points and 15 rebounds, a 58.75 fantasy point day versus Denver, aided a little bit by some of that foul trouble for Andre Drummond, but really, it's mostly him looking a little bit closer to form to where we've seen him have that ceiling earlier in the year. So Blake Griffin to me interests me quite a bit. I think this spot versus the Magic is one where you're going to see him and Drummond again put full effort forward, and that's the spot where you want to have Blake Griffin. Reggie Jackson's had 31 fantasy points in 2 out of his last 3 games, and the one downside of that performance is that he continues to be Reggie Jackson, so that could turn south at any moment. The price works though, and he's a guy playing for the playoffs, so it does matter. I think that it's an okay spot for Reggie Jackson. I don't mind a little bit of him, but again, because of his ongoing condition of being Reggie Jackson, I don't want a ton. Luke Kennard and Wayne Ellington are vaguely interesting GPP dart tosses to me, especially if one of these other guys falters. I think you could see them have some upside. Not guys I want a ton of, but again, as a dart toss, a 1 out of every 20, every 100 lineups, one of these guys could have some value. Nikola Vucevic had 57 fantasy points in that last must-win game versus Miami. He hasn't been great versus Detroit this year, but his price is down a bit. He does project well for me, and he does currently expect to have 23% ownership on him, so I'd want to match the field there because I think he does have some upside here. I think he's a guy who's getting a lot of the work down the stretch as long as the Magic are trying to get into the playoffs. Evan Fournier's usage was down versus Miami, but he had 3 straight games above 34.75 fantasy points before that. Again, it's a low total game, so I'm not dying to get there, but Fournier has been pretty good recently, and his Detroit matchup a little bit less onerous with the defense on the wing for him, so Fournier could be an okay play today. Aaron Gordon, Terrence Ross, and DJ Augustine are all okay to me, but I'd really rather focus in on Vooch as the star player here, the guy who's probably going to get the most usage. I think Aaron Gordon's a viable pivot to him. Terrence Ross can get going at any time, and DJ Augustine's just been professional night in and night out. A little bit of a conflict with Evan Fournier in terms of usage, but still, I think these guys are fine, but really, there are other spots to go to on the slate, so I'd rather go to the big ticket items and try to find my value or mid-priced guys elsewhere. In the last corner I want to hit on is a game with the Clippers visiting the Bucks. This one is a 232.5 point combined total, which represents a 2.8 point boost for Milwaukee and a 2.6 point drop for the Clippers. Lou Williams could benefit quite a bit with no Patrick Beverley out there. He did play the entire second half of last game when Beverley went out with this injury. Lou Williams is averaging 1.45 fantasy points with no Pat Beverley on the court versus 1.26 in general time. There is some risk Landry Shamet may take some minutes away from him, and I'll talk about him in a second, but Lou Williams to me looks pretty good, and I think the Bucks defense is a concern, but if anybody's going to shoot the Clippers into this game today, it's probably going to be Lou Williams. As I mentioned, Landry Shamet's return could cut into Lou Williams' opportunity just a bit, but the fact the Bucks will give some guys a lot of opportunity from deep could bode well for Landry Shamet. If they don't respect him as a shooter, he may end up getting a lot of looks. So I don't mind Shamet as a little bit of a value play, just a touch of him in my lineups, because I think he could spike a big day here if the Clippers keep this close. Danilo Gallinari projects for under 5% ownership, and to me, I think he's either going to have a great day or he's going to get completely throttled here. So I want to have some Danilo Gallinari. He's been really steady recently, but this matchup is going to be tough, and he is the nominal star of the Clippers, so he's going to get all the attention. So it could be tough for Danilo, but he's been good enough where I want to give him a few chances and see what he can do. Montrezl Harrell had 39.25 fantasy points versus Milwaukee much earlier this year, but he's the kind of guy who gives Milwaukee fits. What they try to do is keep one guy in the middle, rotate everybody else around on the edges. So Harrell, an athletic guy who's pretty rugged inside, can grab some boards, can get some easy plays in the interior on offense and in defense. So I don't mind Montrezl Harrell here, but I think his ownership being so much higher than Lou Williams doesn't really make sense to me. Giannis Antetokounmpo projects for 21% ownership, and I think you just got to match the field there just in case he has one of those crazy high ceiling days. The downside of it is if he has 70 fantasy points, there's a decent chance you don't necessarily need him in a tournament winning lineup, but the fact that he can get there, it's a good pace spot. The Clippers interior are not that good inside, so I think it could be a situation where we do see a Giannis ceiling day. It's not confident enough to really load up on him above the field. Chris Middleton had 23 shots versus Houston last game, and his usage in general has been up a bit since Malcolm Brogdon went out. Middleton to me is a sneaky play. He's at a reasonable price. He does have some upside at it. The pace here looks pretty good, so Middleton to me, an interesting tournament play. It's a similar thing for me with Eric Bledsoe. He had 19 shots last game versus Houston. Again, the pace here with the Clippers is pretty solid, so he can get there. I think both he and Middleton are interesting in lineups in which you're not playing Giannis. So there we go. Those are my thoughts on today's slate, and of course, as always, there's more in the link in the description. My column, The Switch and Hedge at Awesemo.com. Read it right now. I have details on all the games there. Some thoughts on Luka Doncic and his hot run. A lot of stuff to talk about that I couldn't fit in this video. The Raptors value, so go check that out now in the link in the description. And now, as promised yesterday, the big winner, the big shout out, drum roll please, the man who got the prediction correct. You're going to see it on the screen right now. Rich SoCal Nuts, 21 fantasy points for Enes Kanter, hit it on the nose. That was a play apparently not to make. Enes Kanter did not show up. Damian Lillard showed up about as well as he does on the Source Awards of the year. So that's a situation where that hurt me quite a bit yesterday. But hey, that's life sometimes. And apparently when you're playing a terrible Bulls team, players may not exert their full force. So that's life, but congrats to Rich SoCal Nuts. And hey, that was a lot of fun. A lot of comments yesterday, a lot of people participating. So thank you guys for watching. Like the video, leave a comment today again, telling me which low-owned guy you like the most on today's slate. As always, I'll jump in there, talk with you guys a little bit later. So please like the video right now and leave a comment. And check the promo code Switch and Hedge. It'll give you half off any package at Awesemo.com. As you may know, MLB season started today. I'll be doing a lot more MLB content in coming weeks. So get in there now. Get an all-sport package for half off that first month. Get all the ownership projections and rankings for every sport. There are people who win money by not even watching a sport. They just use Alex's rankings and get in there. He's the top player in the world for a very good reason. So check it out. Check the promo code. I'll be back again tomorrow with another Four Corners video. So good luck.